Welcome back to the Blurred Wire. Today we are discussing, dissecting, and delving into Dune Part 2. This movie has become a cultural phenomenon, and we tried to do our review of it spoiler free a little bit ago. Um, and it wasn't like completely spoiler free, it was kind of. So now we're just kind of taking that off, and it's going to be full of spoilers. So if you haven't seen it yet, first of all, what are you doing if you haven't
How
seen it
have
yet?
how have you? It's not even in theaters anymore. How did you
Is
go
it?
that long? I think it just left last week
Oh, wow.
at
I'm
the
surprised.
time of us recording.
I wouldn't be surprised if they did a re-release because that explains why Godzilla versus Kong is doing so well because it's not
Dune Part
competing with
2
Dune Part
minus
2.
minus color.
Dune Part 2 minus color. Oh, maybe so. Dune Part black and white. I don't know if that would work. Um,
Part
but
B.
so I guess we'll have to wait till it comes out on streaming to like really watch it again.
Mhm.
But now we are talking spoiler free about why Dune 2 Part 2 was such a good movie.
It was such a good movie.
Such a good
Um, I I feel so many things
so many things.
from Dune Part Two. I feel so happy to be number one, just a Dune fan in
Yeah,
this internet age, to see it like touch the cult, like the zeitgeist. Like
yeah,
it feels so magical to see people talking about Shai Hulud, and it's not just what is Shai Hulud, what is this stupid book, you know?
yeah.
It's people actually, talking about Dune. And I think for that, Denis, I'm so grateful for this movie.
Well, I mean, and
Um,
it's even better because we have the perspective of an actual Dune fan, which makes this so much better because you've liked Dune since we were in middle school or high school?
uh, Middle school.
Middle school, yeah.
Middle school, I probably read it before then, like the first time. And then I started like rereading it, and it really absorbed me in like middle school.
Yeah. So, so as we know, there were a lot of changes. So I think that's where I want to start because there are a lot of changes from the book to the movie. I mean,
Hmm.
I guess I won't say a lot. They are
Hmm.
significant.
Hmm.
So they're kind of big changes that impacted the narrative. So, let's talk about some of them. What are some of the ones that you liked that were changes from the book to the movie?
I think so to me, it always all of the changes for the most part kind of boil down to this one change of, instead of doing a 2 year time skip
Hmm.
in between parts one and two, we follow Paul straight through it, and the events of the book instead take place over a span of like 6 or 8 months or so, like half a year. And in doing that, you don't have to have a most likely poorly CGI'd toddler um with Alia.
Hmm.
Um and as much as I love that in the book, I can see how that would be very difficult to translate to the medium of film. And
Hmm.
I'm always welcoming of any kind of changes if it's going to serve the medium that it's in. I think that's probably the right call for him to make, because at the end of the day, the story is about the characters, and it's about Paul. And I think Denis was able to make that change in a way that is palatable, which is
Yeah.
so difficult to make, to number one, just like to put the words of Dune onto screen, but then to make it enticing and appealing to a general audience. It's funny. Just last night, I was talking to my parents, who are very much not necessarily into Dune, but they watch
What?
like whatever's big at the
Hmm.
time, and they love it.
Oh,
So
wow.
so for Denis to be able to make my parents who are close to their 60s
Oh my
really
gosh.
enjoy Dune, I think is a testament
Hmm.
to his skill. And so I think no matter what, I think the changes he made are probably for the best for this story.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we won't unpack the fact that, your parents didn't get interested in a franchise because of love for their son, but more that it was popular when you've been talking about Dune for a long time. But,
Hey,
like I said, that's a
hey,
whole
you're
other.
you're not my therapist.
What is this? This is therapy
What is
session now?
this?
Um, I think you're right. And to me, like when I look at it, because really that 2 year time jump is really an excellent way to break up a movie into two different parts because you have a 2 year gap in there. So it's kind of
Right.
like a natural conclusion, and you can pick up at the end of the 2 years. And technically, you don't really have to show everything that's going on in those 2 years, or you
Hmm.
can show like a brief little montage. But
Hmm.
on paper, it would make sense to keep that the way it was. And even
Right.
if Denis realized, and I think he, kept Aaliyah as a embryo throughout the film because he
Hmm.
really didn't want that to distract from the powerful character studies he was doing, which
Hmm.
it definitely would have, especially compared to David Lynch's Dune. All anyone can really talk about is the toddler,
Hmm.
Aaliyah, like trying to pretend like she's an adult. And so I think he did a good job in deciding like that would have distracted for it. But again, he could have just made the decision. It would have been a tougher decision, but he could have went with the time jump and just kind of said that like, hey, she doesn't inherit all the Bene Gesserit Reverend mothers before her. You know what I mean? He could have just kind of like
Hmm.
ignored that and just had her be born anyway and just have her be a normal child. So do you
Hmm.
think there's any other reason in particular why he decided to forego the time jump because he still wanted to keep it honest to the books? Or is there anything else that kind of goes into that?
I think the other kind of changes that go along with it are less consequential.
Mm-hmm.
I think I disagree. I do feel that like Alia's whole character is based around the fact that she is born with that knowledge. I don't think Alia as a character works if you take that away
Oh, way. Okay.
because she really is at her core that she
Mm-hmm.
is this child who was cursed with the knowledge of all of her ancestry, and cursed into having a fully developed like consciousness in utero,
Yeah.
and how awful that is, and that gets explored later, but I think for her that's who she is at her core. I think you get into a lot of changes with then how do you help motivate Paul to drink the water of life? Because for you can still have the attack on Siege Tabor, but for Paul, a huge motivating factor was the death of his son,
Yeah.
which came from that 2 year time gap. So you
Mm-hmm.
cut that away, you have to gain a new motivation. And I think Denis did it in a really great way by number one, changing how we get introduced to the Fremen and changing Chani,
Okay.
because Chani is way more her own character
So that's
in
another change
this.
that you liked.
I love it. I
I
know
think that's the
that
best one.
I've read some thoughts of some other Dune fans who weren't as keen of Chani's changes, but I think she serves it twofold. I think it's a very dense movie, and so having a character who is constantly saying, "Hey, Paul, maybe don't go towards the path of genocide." Maybe, um, I think is unfortunately kind of necessary in a lot of like the modern movie going climate. And even with it, it hasn't really helped if a lot of opinion pieces I've read about Dune Part 2 are to like be actually believed.
Yeah.
Um, but two, she becomes an actual character
Mm-hmm.
instead of just
Mm-hmm.
being this zealot who believes in Paul and follows blindly. She kind of just becomes a foil for him. She becomes just a a human body for to
Incubation.
birth, yeah, to
Yeah.
birth
And
Paul's children,
yeah.
and that's it. Here, Chani is a character, and I think she's way
Hmm.
more interesting because of it. And two, we get to see something I love so much. Probably one of my favorite scenes from this movie is the scene where Paul gets his Fremen name, where he becomes where he gets his name Usul after the first raid they do together. It's Paul, his perspective, he's just trying to prove himself to the Fremen. He's trying to prove that he doesn't care about any prophecy they have. He's at the time he's disregarding it. He wants revenge and he wants to work with them. And we get to see something that we never really get in the books. And we get to see the Fremen laugh. We get to see them be.
You get to see a community.
Yeah. And I think Frank Herbert, a lot of his introduction to the Fremen is very interesting, but it's typically in here is how their society functions. And
Mhm.
it's very cool to see. We get to see it reflected with Paul having taking on the responsibility of Jameis's wife and two kids, how that is reflective of the Fremen as a very tight-knit community that has systems in place to where everyone is always taken care of and
Yeah.
watched over. And that reads well. We get to see how much they recycle old materials and equipment. We get tours
Mhm.
of how they build all the different devices that they use, like a paracompass or the thumpers to summon the sandworms. We get to see all of that, and through that in the book, we get to see how the Fremen operate. But in the language of film, we get all of that, and I'd argue then some, with just one scene of them all sitting together in a camp, celebrating and laughing and singing over a successful guerrilla warfare attack against the harvesters.
Eh,
And it's it does so much for making them feel not just these people who are manipulated by the Bene Gesserit, but
mhm.
human beings. They are not just the title. They are individuals, and they are a real culture.
Yeah, and I think that change in and of itself is kind of powerful too, because you brought up how Jamas's wife and son had to be cared for by Paul after he killed them. So
Mhm.
technically, in Dune Part Two, we should have seen. I think her name is Hamar, or is it Hamar?
Oh, now that we're
Escapes me
recording,
right
my
now.
I'm
Yeah.
drawing a blank right now. I can't remember.
But anyway, so Paul was supposed to take care of them. And of course,
Mhm.
they obviously weren't in this movie. And there's
Right.
a lot of reasons because that probably wouldn't translate to film as well. Because every time we'd see the child, we'd remember that Paul kind of took away their dad and
Hmm.
took away her husband, which would have kind of taken away from the subtlety of the villain narrative that Denis was doing. Like if we
Hmm.
already remember throughout the movie that Paul killed this person's father,
Hmm.
the subtlety of him kind of becoming a full-fledged genocidal maniac doesn't really hit because
Hmm.
he already did kill somebody. So like we remembered that he killed somebody, but that was more out of like duty and necessity in the first movie because he was challenged.
Hmm.
And so I think by removing that and inserting in more laughter and more of a community sense, it
Hmm.
really helps us see how powerful the Bene Gesserit's prophecies and everything's really are too, because we see these laughing people who obviously they have a lot of skills, to stop all the spice production, but we see them turn into this army that's going to cause so much bloodshed. And it's
Hmm.
like at this point in the movie, they're just a laughing, happy community. But once they get wrapped up in all this fervor, next thing you
Hmm.
know, Paul is saying, like, okay, we're gonna go blow up and kill billions of people. And they're like, Lisan Al Gaib, that's what we're gonna
Hmm.
do. Like they're all like
Yeah.
completely on board with it. And I think
Yeah.
that juxtaposition, because if he had left in the Hamar storyline, I guess that's what we'll call her for now, they would have seemed a lot more like honor bound, and it kind of would have made a little bit more sense in a way because we would have seen them as like an honor bound and a fierce kind of people. But
Hmm.
with this, I feel like he strips back a lot of that fierceness that we got from the first movie. Because the first movie, we didn't know anything about them. Paul met
Hmm.
them, and a guy immediately tried to kill them. That's kill him. That usually screams like, okay, this is kind of a fierce, intense people. But by
Right.
stripping that back, Denis allowed us to see them, and then we all got amazed as we watched as the fervor completely took them over.
Right. And it makes it more tragic too,
Mm-hmm.
because we could see the potential of what could be without that.
Mm-hmm.
Like they are happy in that raid and working towards making Arrakis or making Dune a green planet.
Mm-hmm.
But with that guidance from Paul, with that leadership from Paul, they get they get pushed down this and they get manipulated into this path of genocide and destruction. And I like too that Denis added a strong lens towards um, a group of the Northerners, the Northern
Mm-hmm.
tribes of people who didn't believe in the prophecy and helped break up the Fremen from being this this monotheistic group of people who just believe this one thing. It's like in what other like real life um metaphor, like connection to a real life like culture of people are so totally all in the same agreement. There it's not realistic.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't feel like they're real. And Denis makes the Fremen feel real. And I love those changes.
Yeah. And I think that's very powerful too because like it shows you the because like they all kind of believe the same thing, but it also makes sense because you have the Northerners, and the Northerners that don't really believe are mainly younger, which
Hmm.
is a lot of times that will happen. Like a newer generation that's born into kind of a religious theme or something, sometimes they
Hmm.
can start to question it, and sometimes
Hmm.
not have those, or things that are, that the older ones like see as like horrible or terrible. They're like, is it really that bad?
Hmm.
That newer generation is always going to bring up questions, and so I think Denis did an excellent job of portraying that as well, and it really did give Chani a lot of agency. And so like I said, we talked about the time skip, which
Yes.
enabled which enabled Aaliyah to remain in the womb, so we
Hmm.
haven't seen her yet, even though we got a glimpse of it.
Hmm.
And also kind of kept the story moving along. I feel like it kind of kept us involved in the story.
Hmm.
Some people didn't like it because they felt like, that Paul kind of grasped the Fremen ways a little too quickly.
Hmm.
But I would argue like Paul's also been training to be a fighter all of his life. And I
Hmm.
think that's kind of the point because he didn't really grasp the Fremen ways as much as like he's one of them because everybody likes him and they want him to be the Lisan al Gaib. But
Hmm.
like Shawnee points out, she's like, "You're still an outsider," and he's like, "You still don't trust me after all this time." Like that was a
Hmm.
powerful moment, but again, if he had been there for 2 years, like really learning the Fremen culture, I don't think
Hmm.
it hits as hard. And again, Shawnee's whole thing is she doesn't believe that an outsider should be the one leading the Fremen to paradise. And lo
Right.
and behold, by the end, it's an outsider leading the Fremen onto paradise. And so it's like all those things I feel like the time gap actually helps with. And then,
Right.
of course, we talked about how great the shift in Shawnee's character was, having her questioning the religion, having her questioning Paul, yet
Yes.
still being in love with him, which really was an interesting change. Um,
Yes.
and the fact that like there's so many narratives opened up. Because again, if you watch Dune Part Two, like she pretty much just like a concubine to hold his babies. I mean, not Dune Part
In the
Two,
book, in the
in the
book.
book and in
Yes.
David Lynch's Dune. David Lynch's because she appears in one
Right.
scene to make out with him and show that she's pregnant now.
She's not a character, and
Yeah.
that's that's partly a lot of sci-fi of that era
Yeah.
and just writing in general.
Hmm.
There's a really horrible track record of women not being written as actual people, but
Yeah.
instead as objects and points of service towards the usually white men of the who are the protagonists of the story.
And that's the best part because it's like we know all these stories, especially a book that came out in the 1960s. Like, you
Hmm.
know who it was appealing to? Like, it was
Hmm.
mainly appealing to men and probably white men because that's the most popular audience that you have. So, all those things that he's going to put into the story will really appeal to them. But it's like nowadays with Denis Villeneuve, he discovered that it's like just, giving a character a little bit more, making this more appealing, it makes the story better for everyone, even
Hmm.
your target audience. Like the people
Right.
watching the movie compared to the book will appreciate that change because it makes a better, more captivating story.
Yeah.
So, I guess, are there any changes from the book
Mhm.
that you didn't like so much in this movie?
I'd say it's a change by omission.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's one of those things that I understand why he may have removed it for, for tightening the focus of the film to be about the characters. But I think in doing so, you lose a lot of the greater world building. And talking to people who are not big Dune heads, some of their complaints are how confusing this world can be to operate. And I think there's some subtle ways that he does it explaining it, but omitting things like the spacing guild and how the like Lancerad is set up and how these sci-fi feudal systems function. I think in doing so and removing a lot of scenes that are kind of built around how the processing of spice and how like the political and the economic side of spice is important. Like spice is hardly even talked about aside from it being an important thing. There is one kind of throwaway line in the first movie where um Paul is watching one of the audio books. I forget what they're called. Um and like they talk about how spice improves like longevity of life and like mental faculties. But in the book, we get such very detailed descriptions. You get a true sense of how important it is, and two, how reliant everyone is on
Mm-hmm.
spice. So then at the very end, Paul's threat to destroy the spice in the book, it kind of just feels like um I'm gonna blow up this thing that you like. And in the movie, I should
Yeah, in
say,
the movie. I got what you meant.
it's
Yeah.
like I'm gonna blow up this
This thing
thing
that you
that
like.
you
Mm-hmm.
like or that's valuable. In the book, it's I'm going to destroy the the universal economy. Like I'm going to
Yeah.
make it impossible for you to see and each other and communicate with each other. And I don't think the scale of that threat is really there, and I think you lose it from world building. Like
Mm-hmm.
I really wish, and I know I've read before that Denis really hates the idea of director's cuts afterward. It really bums me out because I think these movies could benefit in that sense from a Lord of the Rings style extended edition of an extra half hour or so of those peppered
Just
in,
more. Just
like just
more.
more, and not just for me because I'd watch any scene of
Uh-huh.
of Doom that he would add in, but I think you lose a lot of the grandness of the scale. And I think you get it in other ways, like the climactic final battle against the Emperor's Sardaukar after he lands is very grand and it's very epic, but the scale is not just he like castle versus castle. This is a universal scale. And
Yeah.
I just don't think I think by omitting a lot of that world building, you lose that scale a bit.
I think,
and I think the
yeah.
threat just doesn't land as hard. I think it's still a very tense scene, and I think it is still very threatening, but just not as powerful because you don't have as much to go behind it.
I think I would agree with you on that. It doesn't quite feel like again, I hate to always compare it to Star Wars because they're different stories,
Hmm.
but it's a space opera as well. And
Hmm.
you compare it to space, even Guardians of the Galaxy, we can use that. Like those stories feel very universal, at least very galaxy.
Hmm.
Dune, both of them feel very planetary. Like it's all
Hmm.
about this planet. And
Hmm.
that's kind of seems like the entire universe. Now, like we see heart how we see the oh, what's the name of the planet? That the Harkonnens are from?
Gidi Prime.
Gidi Prime, yeah. And we see it a little bit, but again, because we know that's where the Harkonnens are from, it doesn't. It just feels like that's where they're from, and now they're here on Arrakis. Like it
Hmm.
doesn't really feel like we've built out to a whole universal scale.
Hmm.
Even when we see little glimpses of the world that the Sardaukar are from,
Hmm.
it's still, and that name escapes me as well. Um, it
Seleucus Secundus.
Yes, that's the one. Yeah,
I could have said anything and
you
you
could
would
have
have said
said yeah.
yes.
I mean, okay. So it doesn't quite feel like we've gotten the universal scale, and I think I'd agree with you on that because
Mhm.
when Paul destroys the spice, it kind of feels like he's just saying, I'm gonna destroy like a bunch of diamonds or something. Like I
Right.
see what
Yeah.
exactly what you mean. It doesn't feel like he's destroying something that's going to cripple the universe. It just feels like he's destroying something that the rich people are gonna miss. That's
Right.
kind of the vibe that we get from the movie.
Because we only get to see, and I think this just kind of happens with the media, with how he told the story very visually and not necessarily with as much dialogue. We only really see Paul be somebody who's as affected by the spice. But from the movie, we're also told that Paul is this special Kwisatz Haderach, that he's this special person. And so the effects of the spice are kind of diluted. We're not like, as film goers, we're not being told that this is the effect that spice can't have on people. We're being shown this is the effect spice has on Paul. So we
Mhm.
never get to see, he's our only frame of reference in the movie for how spice can affect a person. um Thufir Hawat in the first movie takes a lot of spice because as a mentat, that's how he gains his abilities. But we don't get to see that. We don't get to see that affect him and how he's able to do these intense calculations and these deep political strategies
Mhm.
form because of training and assistance from the spice. We don't get to see any of that. All we get to see is the protagonist, who is very unique and special, get special visions from
Yeah.
it.
It kind
And
of
so
feels like it's like I feel like destroying the spice would hurt you more, Paul, than anybody else because you
than
seem like the
anybody
only one who
else,
uses it.
right?
Who has an effect on. And so, I think for me, when it comes to like the book, and just from what like I know about the book, well, even what I know
Mhm.
about David Lynch's 1964 Dune,
Mhm.
I think I have to agree. Like, I like Time Jump. I think it was a
Mhm.
good decision, especially for Aaliyah and maintaining her character. And I
Mhm.
don't think we were ready to have her born. We're in 2021. We are not ready for a
Mhm.
3-year-old to act like an adult. But I
Mhm.
do kind of miss Paul's son, not because like, and I think even casting Timothee Chalamet, it's hard to see him as like a dad already because he's
Mhm.
so young looking. So I don't think that it really worked in the movie, and I think it was a good decision to kind of leave out Paul's son.
Mhm.
But
And it worked. It worked for him being a teenager because he is a
mhm,
teenager in the book. And so that
mhm,
casting works really well. It
yeah,
just it's tougher when he becomes more mature. But I think at the very end, when Paul has finally taken that water of life and
yeah,
he becomes the full Lisan Al Gaib
yeah,
and the full Kwisatz Haderach. I think I think he does, and this is just him as an actor. I think he really impressively, he does not seem like a teenager there anymore.
Yeah, no,
He
and it
seems
feels
like
like, yeah,
he is grown at that point.
yeah, yeah, and Timothy Chalamet was the perfect one for the role. And like I said, I feel like Denis was probably like, "Hey, we're gonna do the time jump because again, while that means Paul's son wasn't gonna be born, feels like if we had him have a son, like we're not trying to encourage teenage pregnancy with this movie, and that might seem like what that's doing, even though we know it's not. But
I
especially
really
getting
don't.
Zendaya.
I'd like to talk to the person whose takeaway from Dune was
Well, they're so
teenage
young. They're so
pregnancy.
young. Like Zendaya portrayed a high schooler. She's still portraying a high schooler. But anyway,
Mhm,
I think that removing him though does kind of I think that's a stronger reason for Paul to become the Kwisatz Haderach and take the water of life than we
mhm,
got in Dune Part Two. Because in Dune Part Two, that feels like the only moment. I won't say that like it wasn't earned, but it feels like a sudden shift. Because yes, the Fremen were attacked, and yes, they started melting rock and destroyed this whole thing. Um, I think like if I was Denis and I decided to remove that, I would have chosen someone who had become close to Paul while he was with the Fremen and had them die to kind of help be the catalyst. Whether that was well, it was like I don't think I could have chosen Stilgar because then he wouldn't have been able to help like promote the Lisan al Gaib and all the stuff that he did after that was very important.
mhm.
I would have had to choose someone that died that really felt like it affected it because again, it's like it's not like the Harkonnens weren't killing Fremen because they got some of them died every time they went out on a mission. It just kind of feels like in this particular time when this got destroyed, it's like it feels I don't want to say sudden, but it kind of feels like one of those things that's like it needs to happen for the plot to continue, and that's why it's here rather than an organic part of the story moving forward, if that makes sense.
Right. And I think that's when you have, you know, when you have 2 years that, the motivator, instead of being, largely the death of your son, and instead being the potential death of the people that you love, they're just different motivators. But I think
Mm-hmm.
that motivator hits harder when you have more time together. And right now, Paul he doesn't even have a full orbit, a full year with Chani at this point. And
Yeah.
so I'm not I'm not doubting his feel. I think their love is very well portrayed by
Mm-hmm.
Timothy and Zendaya in the film. But I think that 6 month period just it loses a little bit of its relatability and the understanding of why he's making that choice.
Yeah. Sorry, I had technical difficulties. I like dropped my microphone or something and it fell off. So sorry about all the extra noise in there. But yeah, I think because yeah, he only was with the Fremen for a short period of time, but
Mhm,
because we got to see him grow with the Fremen, because Denise spent so much time building up that community.
mhm.
It still kind of worked. Like we still felt like, okay, this makes sense that Paul is this close to these people and he believes this. So like who was that character? I can't remember who she was played by, but obviously it's not Shawnee, but the one who was like,
Her
um,
friend.
yeah, who's like, you gotta drink worm piss.
Hmm.
Like, while she had a very important scene with like Austin Butler, I think if
Hmm.
I was choosing, like, I would have had her die in the melting rock thing. Like maybe like that doesn't feel like as strong of a catalyst as like his son, but it feels a little bit stronger than what we ended up getting. I think it's just my only point.
Hmm.
I think that would have been a moment to kill off somebody very important to Paul.
So for you, you need the death. Like the death is important
Mhm.
for the motivator for him to take the water of life.
Because again, his whole and I think that's only because the entire movie he's been resisting it so much, so
Right.
heavily. Like
Hmm.
it'd be if he wasn't resisting it, and like I don't know if that's something from the books. If he wasn't resisting it, maybe we wouldn't feel the same way. But because
Hmm.
he was so actively resisting it, because he knows it's going to cause all this death, I guess in the book he's like, well, it feels like in the movie he's like, well, it's better to have the Fremen kill everybody than have the Harkonnens kill the Fremen. But that doesn't really
Mhm.
feel as powerful. I think it's like if he sees someone that he loves dies, it's like, oh, now I am so angry. I'm going to take this so we can absolutely eradicate the Harkonnens. And also,
Mhm.
I don't want this to happen to Shawnee or my mother or someone that I really, really care for. I think that could
Right.
have driven it a little bit more in that respect.
I see where you're coming from. I think for me they're just different. I don't think one is necessarily greater than the other, but I think both benefit from having more time together.
Mm-hmm.
Both motivators for him taking the water of life.
Yeah.
Um, an interesting while we're talking about it, that scene where Paul is taking it, there's a really interesting change from the book that I liked where Chani her name is linked with like a prophecy for Paul where she's supposed to like desert tears are what brings Paul back. And after he takes the water of life and he's lying on the ground, Chani comes in and Lady Jessica uses the voice on her to force her to engage with that prophecy and bring Paul back. If you think about it, what would taking more water of life do for Paul? How would that actually bring him back? More if it's poison, how would
Mm-hmm.
drinking more poison wake him up from a catatonic state due to poison? You know?
Yeah.
Um, I think I think that the entire time Paul was alert and awake,
You think he
just
was
masking
faking?
it. I think I think he waited because think of what that did for the Fremen who saw it.
Yeah.
it
That's an
it
excellent point.
radicalized them. It radical like yes, this is the Lisan al Gaib. Look, just as the prophecy said, look, it's happening before our very eyes. Because he
Mm-hmm.
could have come up at any time and probably still convinced a lot of people, but he made sure to make their prophecy come true.
And that's
And
kind of what, and after, I think that would have been more powerful too, because he exposed that, hey, Lady Jessica, like, sure, that's the like prophecy, but she's been trained to do this. So it's not really a miracle. It's it's part of her training.
right. And I like that scene because I like what this transformation for Paul means thematically because I think Paul is a really interesting character to look at, kind of like Walter White from Breaking Bad. At the
Mm-hmm.
very start of the show, he is just an innocent man who tragically gets cancer. And by the end, he is a dangerous drug kingpin with his who has killed many people. At a certain point within the show, you as the person watching it will find a point where you say, okay, no, you crossed the line.
Yeah.
For some people, it is immediately with him not being honest with his cancer to Skylar.
Mm-hmm.
To other people, it's the first time he starts cooking drugs. For others, it's the first time he kills someone, depending on everybody's own like moral compass, they'll feel differently about that. I feel like there's a similar thing with Paul because he
Mm-hmm.
starts off so innocently as just this teenage boy who's been birthed into this world with a weight that is greater than anybody can have set upon his shoulders, even though he doesn't necessarily know it yet. And by the end, he is setting up a universal like genocide. At a
Yep.
certain point, everyone is going to have a say where nope, right there, you cross the line here at this point. And and I like what that does thematically because it shows that it's not necessarily just Paul, that Paul is evil necessarily for doing these things. It is the system that he is in. It is in part the weight of those expectations on him, and the fact that there is an economic and political situation where the only way for the Fremen, for the people that he cares about, um to be to be safe. I use giant air quotes with the word safe, but not
Yeah,
immediately killed by other enemies, is to be the biggest enemy, to be the
exactly.
biggest threat.
Yeah.
And so instead of using his power to try to change the system, the only way that he feel that he can survive is to engage in the system. And in doing so, it shines a great light onto how that system comes to be from that
Mhm.
fear of death, but also how dangerous it is and how easy it is for someone to slip into it, especially given the weight and the power that Paul has.
Yeah, and I think that's very powerful. And I think that's part of why, because like all of this starts because Paul loses his father.
Hmm.
And I think Dune Part One did a great job of establishing what a good man Leto Atreides was
Hmm.
and why it hurts. Like it literally feels like the galaxy, the planet, the world is
Hmm.
worse off without someone like him in the world. Like we're all
Hmm.
very sad for like his passing. And Denis did a
Hmm.
great job of highlighting that. And that's
Hmm.
kind of why I feel like, losing Stilgar or Gurney in that attack, like another father figure would have helped push Paul to the edge because he's already not thinking that rationally
Hmm.
because all he's thinking about is his father and how much that he's hurt by his death, which is obvious. I mean, it's natural because especially when you love your father that much. But I
Hmm.
think that's why it kind of feels like he needs something. And so I think you're
Hmm.
right. Like to me, if Paul like really did trick Shani out of all people, to me that's kind of like the turning point.
Hmm.
Um, because throughout the movie you can justify almost everything that he's done in the entire movie until he tells everyone that he's going to kill the houses if they don't accept him as the next emperor.
Hmm.
Because if he had just, stopped before like taking the emperor, or if they were like, hey, we don't accept you, and he was like, oh, okay, that's fine. I just won't be emperor then. Like once he
Hmm.
resorts to that next step of like, okay, I'm gonna kill some innocent people until you accept me as your emperor because I want as much power as he has, that's
Hmm.
when you start, that's when you kind of realize like what Paul has become. And the thing
Hmm.
is, if you realize that as the Bene Gesserit, as the Kwisatz Haderach, he knew all of that was going to happen. Like he
Hmm.
knew if they're not going to accept my ascendancy to emperor.
Hmm.
The fact that he knows it makes you throw in like when you rewatch the movie, which I think this movie does lend itself to a lot of rewatches. It
Yes, a lot
makes
of
you
little
have to
things.
go through the turning point, right?
Yeah.
It's like, so is the turning point when he drank the water? Is it
Hmm.
before, like, when did that happen? Especially if he already knew, yeah, if I do this, no matter what, billions of people are going to die. And
Hmm.
I know how to stop those billions of people from dying, but I'm still going to do what I do. Because he could have gotten his revenge on the Harkonnens, got them off of Arrakis, and even maybe even set up himself like as the king of Arrakis and just sold spice to the emperor if he knew that by seizing the emperorship that all of the Fremen were going to end up attacking these houses because they weren't going to accept it. Because
Right.
he has all those visions of the future, he knows that. And he
Hmm.
still chose to go the genocide route to take the emperor's spot.
Right. Because if he kills the emperor, like what happens? Like everyone else has been called. Like, surely if he doesn't take that spot, they're going to come, like the other great houses are going to come and attack them, whether he's in that spot or not, because of what has happened. And so I think it's one of those like for me, like thematically with the book and what I think Denis really gets right from where I'm standing, um, is just that thematic that it's not necessarily just Paul as the emperor is bad. It's that there being an emperor
Is bad. Hmm.
is bad because I think even you said to the point that Duke Leto was a good man, and I think like the movie itself showed like he was a very empathetic and understanding father, a good maybe role model for him. At the end of the day, when he came to Arrakis, he was fully planning on trying to get the Fremen to use them as a military force for himself. Even the good Duke, Duke Leto,
Hmm.
was prepared to use the Fremen as a shield for him and his family to be safe. And it's not necessarily it's not I don't say that to try to condemn him as a person. It's the
No,
position.
it's
It's
condemning
that
power. Yeah.
when you are at that position, the position itself requires unethical decision making and requires harming other innocent people for your own good. And I think Dune through Paul shows a kind of like arduous journey from beginning to end of that power and how it corrupts.
Mm.
It kind of it shows it from a lot of different angles, and honestly, I back to Changes We Like, I like that Chani is more of a character and more
Hmm.
directly opposing it. I don't think it's done in a way that disrespects the the moviegoers like intelligence of seeing
Hmm.
Paul begin to do these horrible things towards
Yeah.
the end. It makes her a character, and it really backs up the theming, which makes Dune so great.
Yeah. I mean, I have to agree. And I think, and some of those little changes that all stem from skipping the time jump. So because of that, who kills Baron Harkonnen? It's Paul. And that's much more fitting. Goes over, just stabs him in and like as a fan watching, like, you should never really be excited anytime anybody dies. But it's not like we were like, oh man, that was brutal. We were all kind of like, I was waiting to see when he was gonna get got because that
Hmm.
guy was horrible and horrifying. And
Hmm.
so that felt like a satisfying moment that needed to be Paul's. It was nice to kind of see Gurney get his revenge on Raban, which is more like a side
Hmm.
plot kind of thing that he added in. And like in a way, like I would have loved for the fight to be like a little bit longer, but I think it
Hmm.
just kind of shows that like Raban is not a very strong character.
Hmm.
He's just kind of I don't want to say whiny, but kind of.
Hmm.
And like the fact that he gets dispatched so easily just like shows how much of a little, what I'm trying to say, he kind
Yeah.
of is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that change worked really well for the film, having it be Gurney getting his revenge against Raban.
Hmm.
But I think we may have even mentioned this in our first part. Wow, did Dave Bautista do a great job
Oh
as
yeah.
Raban? I think I said it before, but I will say it again. The fact that Dave Bautista can seem scared, like, number one, what a great job acting as terrified as he did in the film, but to have the beast of a man, Dave Bautista, genuinely feel terrified.
By Austin Butler, a guy whose diapers he could have changed because again, Dave Bautista is like almost double his age. Like that could be his son. That could be
and
his son.
and
He's scared of this
still
teenage heartthrob from Zoe 101.
and it works.
And it
And it
works.
works.
Yeah, that had to be a lot. And so like I kind of got like your not I'm gonna say like red string theory, but like your personal theory on like how you think Paul was faking and Shawnee didn't actually do anything. He just wanted to fulfill the prophecy, which makes a lot of sense because there's been a lot of people
Yes.
online that have been saying like, how did that work? But it's like again, remember Paul has been training as a Bene Gesserit too. So again,
Two.
the same way Jessica like they have a lot of power over their organs to rework poison, he may not have been dying. And obviously, Jessica forces Shawnee to do it because if Paul was faking that, Jessica would have been right on board because
Hmm.
that's exactly what she wanted. And
Hmm.
so I think my like little red string theory almost, and partially
Hmm.
why he forewent the time jump is because like first of all, Denis did a fantastic job. So now with Dune Messiah, because Dune Messiah isn't really written as like a completion of a trilogy, obviously. The way the book is
Right.
set up, it's not even like it feels like it's just kind of what happens next. And
Yes.
it feels like a much smaller and a much shorter storyline. But
Very
from
much
where
so. And kind of famously, it was written specifically because Frank Herbert had so many people and
yeah,
reviews missed the point of
yeah.
Dune.
Because they
And
were
so
like,
he
Paul
felt,
is
no, no,
great. And
okay.
so he just
Okay.
really had to,
Jesus. Okay. So
yeah.
okay. Attila the Hun, Hitler,
Yeah. He's not
Paul.
Jesus. Yeah. And again, remember, like, and I think that's one of the most powerful parts of this. I gotta get back to my theory in just a second. But one of the most powerful parts is like obviously the Messiah narrative, it all comes straight from the Bible and Jesus being the Messiah for the Jews. Like that's a lot of the inspiration for it.
Hmm.
But again, like people comparing Paul to Jesus, I see why Frank Herbert was upset by that because Jesus never accepted any throne. And
Hmm.
that's partially why he ended up dying. When the Jews tried to make him king, he ran away. And that's partially why he still remains in our narrative as this benevolent figure because he never took the power. And like that's the point here. Paul is in that Jesus Messiah role and he take not only does he take it, he seizes it. And
Hmm.
we got to see how much that's corrupting him. And that's kind of I feel like I see why Frank Herbert is like, no, this is not Jesus. This is Genghis Khan. This is Attila the Hun. This is
Hmm.
Hitler. Like, this is what I'm doing with this. And so,
Hmm.
my theory, because Denis is now set up with Doom Messiah, like he can use a lot of Doom Messiah as a basis point, but he can also kind of take it wherever he wants with Paul kind of set up as the villain, but he has so much time to work with because there's a 12-year gap between Dune Part 2 and Dune Messiah. So if he
Hmm.
wants to, he can incorporate some of that. He could have the movie, he could do like completely taking place in the 12-year gap and keep some elements from the other one. He probably
Hmm.
will go with it though, because we do want to see like a grown up Aaliyah at some point.
Hmm.
Um, but I think my theory is that Shani is pregnant.
Mm.
And I think because again, we don't see that. I mean, we don't see her give birth, but obviously in the movie we see that she's been intimate with Paul. And I think
Right.
that's an important scene, partially because of what they're talking about, but also because I think Denis is setting up for her to be because again, Leto Atreides, Paul's son, plays a big role in the Dune movies going forward.
Hmm.
And so obviously at this point, and I think that was another interesting change too, having Paul end up with. Did you send me balloons?
No, did you?
No, I don't know where that came from. I wasn't gonna comment on it, but I saw your face and I was like, did Ty do this?
No, I didn't send you.
Okay,
I
well,
swear I didn't send you balloons.
if you're listening, we're recording this with Zoom, and some reason a bunch of balloons just popped up on the screen. So we must have hit an achievement or something.
Is it your birthday or something? It's not your
It is
birthday.
not my birthday. Nope. Is it your
Huh.
birthday?
Nope.
No, yeah, you're only 10 days ahead of me, so I don't know why I even said that.
I
So,
don't. Yeah, I don't know
okay.
why. Okay.
All right. Well, moving on. Um, because Leto, so where was I? Princess Arulin? Yeah, Princess Arulin. Um, I think it was very interesting that Shawnee is kind of not on board with Paul marrying Princess Arulin. Like she seems so shocked by it, and then like she
Hmm.
like kind of ran away. Because in the books, like it's more of like a transactional, like we're married in like um uh law, but we're not really together, right? Like
Right.
we're not together. But I
It's a
think what
political marriage, not
political,
a.
yeah, yeah. And
Mhm.
he and Shani just like stays as his concubine. But I
Right.
think what Denis is kind of gearing up for is that Paul is just going, since Shani left, I think during the Holy War, I think he's going to end up with Princess Arulin. He's going to treat her like she's his wife. And I
Hmm.
think he's going to have Shani have be pregnant, and Arulon is also eventually going to get pregnant and have one of Paul's other kids. And that is
Mm.
my personal red string theory with how I think he's going to change up Doom Messiah. So I don't. And the sad part is like if he does this, it's going to be compared to like the Luke and Leia Skywalker kind of thing.
Hmm.
But again, it's different because they're by different women. And again, people don't realize how much like okay, Star Wars, a lot of that came from Dune. So this is not really like
Hmm.
pulling from Star Wars. This is Star Wars just happened to have the movies first before Dune could. But
Hmm.
that is kind of my theory in Dune Messiah. We're gonna see Shani is gonna, leave and just like kind of retreat into the desert. I think she's gonna and I think she's gonna spend a lot of her time raising her son. And I think that's partly why because I think we're gonna see the Holy War happen. And I think Shani's gonna run away and take care of her kid and Paul's going to be, dictator over the galaxy and have another kid. And I think seeing the perspectives of the two kids is going to
Hmm.
be very, very interesting. And
Hmm.
then somewhere in that, Aaliyah is also going to play a major role in Doom Messiah. But that's my at least red string prediction.
And that would be a very big change because part of Princess Irulan's motivation is for the fact that she has no heir. She's kind of the end of House Carino um at that point to take the throne, and so she wants to have a child with Paul so that she could secure some kind of heir to the throne.
Mm-hmm.
So I would be very that'd be a very different ending, but the end of Dune is already very different, having
Right.
Chani leave on her own.
Exactly. And even if, like, Paul obviously wants an heir to the throne as well, he's going to be like his father in that regard. And
Mhm.
because Shawnee left, based upon where it is right now, she's pregnant. If she is pregnant, it doesn't look like she's going to be coming back to Paul, right? Like
Right.
it seems like if he becomes dictator, she's not going to go tell him that she's pregnant or any. So if she is pregnant and she's leaving, in Paul's mind, he doesn't have an heir. He doesn't
Hmm.
know that he impregnated Shawnee. So when he marries Prince Arulin, can't find Shawnee anywhere. Just assumes that she left.
Hmm.
Maybe he ends up marrying and maybe he ends up having a child, not ends up marrying, but decides, well, I need an heir, so
Hmm.
Princess Arulin
Hey,
have a child.
who could say no to Florence Pugh?
I mean, I feel like there's a reason why you cast her. Just saying.
Because she's a great actress, and she
Yeah,
killed it as Princess Irulan.
yeah. I think she
Uh,
brought a very steady tone to the entire film too.
I'm curious from your perspective, what did you think of the big twist um that Paul and Lady Jessica were descendants of the Harkonnen?
I thought that was very, again, to me, that's one of those. We also got to talk about Christopher Walken as Emperor Shaddam before I forget. But
Yes, of course.
that was one of those twists that's probably always going to be compared to Star Wars. And for
Of
casual
course.
moviegoers, they're going to say, like, oh, that's a Star Wars thing.
Hmm.
But again, to me, it just goes to show what Star Wars got from Dune. Because was that
Hmm.
in the book that
Yep.
Paul was Harkonnen's? Okay, yeah. So that definitely was a twist, and I did not see it coming.
Hmm.
Also, like, because again, you don't really think of that Baron being able to procreate because Stellan
Hmm.
Skarsgård did a great job of making him seem disgusting,
Hmm.
which again, I think is a testament to his acting because like I said, in David Lynch's Dune, they made him seem disgusting by adding all these boils and all this stuff and like effects that just made it look way silly. Stellan Skarsgård just played a disgusting character without having
Hmm.
to do all that. And it
Hmm.
really was like just in his attitude, the way like that's just a stellar acting job on his part. But I
Absolutely.
I can't really say like if it added anything for me. I think it just shows how far Paul was because the way
Hmm.
he just went over there and was like, "Hey, grandfather," and just killed him. I
Hmm.
was like I understand you're my grandfather. That doesn't mean any mercy. That doesn't mean we're gonna try to talk this out. That doesn't give me any feel towards you because you killed my father. And again,
Hmm.
that would have been his because he's Lady Jessica's father.
Yeah.
So that would
Yes.
make him, he killed his son-in-law. And so
Hmm.
um I think it just kind of goes to show that like it didn't really stop Paul at all. And I
Hmm.
think it showed because again, it kind of showed how much Harkonnen is in Paul, like the power
Hmm.
seizing. And again, if you think of it as like a trait like passed down from fairy from family lines, you can kind of see that like it's kind of in Lady Jessica too. Um,
Hmm.
because again, compared to the definitely compared to this film, compared to the first one, I know Leto Duke Atreides is not known as like supposed to be known as like this great like noble figure. Um,
Hmm.
but Paul and Jessica definitely seem like they're more aggressive than Duke Leto
Hmm.
is. At least, and again, Duke Leto wasn't stranded in the desert with his, you know, parents killed and like only had like this is all he had. So maybe
Right.
if he was in the same situation, we'd see that aggressive
It could
side.
have played out different.
Right. But at least from what we see, it seems like, oh, that's the Harkonnen in you almost. How did you feel about it?
It's one of those things that I really love. I really love how it shows the intricacies of the Bene Gesserit breeding program because I feel like there are signs on the wall that like once you have that reveal, I feel like it makes sense when
Mm-hmm.
I was especially when reading the book because all along we're learning how they're trying to produce the Kwisatz Haderach by by crossbreeding genes from certain political families to have the right one
Mm-hmm.
be produced, and they were trying to breed Jessica's child with a proper Harkonnen child with Feyd-Rautha. Um, and kind of to your point, you mentioned how like how could the Baron ever procreate? I think Dune is one of those worlds where nobody has children out of love, at least on the
That's a good
scale
point.
of
Yeah.
politics. I
Or
don't
no one
think,
and no one has them out of pleasure or enjoyment either.
yeah. I
I mean,
think
some
that's
do,
what
but
that's what
yeah.
makes Paul kind of like the exception there. It's because he's like he's a boy because Duke Leto wanted a boy.
Hmm.
It was an act of love
Yeah,
from
which is very
Jessica
rare.
to try um to give Duke Leto a son that he wanted.
Hmm. So yeah, so I think that'll be very interesting to play out. Now, I'm sure you've heard like there's been a lot of criticism over Christopher Walken's portrayal of Emperor Shaddam the Fourth.
Hmm.
And I actually, because I work for Screen Rant, so I had to do a video on it talking about it. And it was talking about the other side, kind of defending Christopher Walken. So
Hmm.
first, let me find out how you feel about it, and then I'll respond with kind of like my takes on it.
It didn't feel like he was acting.
Okay.
Like I feel like Christopher Walken didn't do anything unique to the role. I don't
Yeah.
I don't dislike him, but I really feel like there could have been somebody better there. Like he really doesn't do anything for me aside from being this like I mean, I feel like what Denis was going for with his portrayal is that the Emperor is kind of just this figurehead, this kind of puppet
Hmm.
under the control of the Bene Gesserit. Because, at that scale, the Bene Gesserit are largely pulling a lot of the strings when it comes to the politics of it. And I think Christopher Walken does a good job at being this kind of this puppet of them. That doesn't mean that I really like him as the
Yeah.
emperor. And I'm of the opinion, I had heard, I forget who I had first heard it from. Uh, I'm of the opinion that having Patrick Stewart would have been so great. Number one, as a nice little reference to
Hmm.
David Lynch's Dune. And two, I think he just would have done more with the role.
I think I think I agree that like it didn't have to be um Christopher Walken. Sorry, lost my
Hmm.
train of thought. I feel like I like what he did with the character Emperor Shaddam. I feel like the
Hmm.
way Denis wrote the character, and I feel like
Hmm.
what he wanted to see, I feel like I would have wanted Patrick Stewart to play it in the same way that Christopher Walken did,
Hmm.
because I feel like I kind of liked the dreariness, the weariness, just the dullness of him.
Hmm.
Like he felt very dull. And it's like at the same time, this is the most powerful being in the entire universe. But
Hmm.
at the same time, we can see that he's really not, because he's paranoid about when he's going to lose his power.
Hmm.
He's being pulled in all these different directions because he's got the Harkonnen have stuff on him, the Bene Gesserit have stuff on him, and you can see like it takes such a toll on him to where he's like an emperor, but kind of in just name only, because he's got all these other things he has to do in order to keep his power as an emperor. And I feel like
Yeah.
making him unremarkable, it kind of shows like how much of a position, like to me, I took that unremarkableness as that's what the position did to him. And it
Hmm.
feels like it juxtaposes it like this isn't something that you should want, because this is
Hmm.
what you'll become. And that's what
Hmm.
I was getting from it. And I feel like I said, I think Christopher Walken, I think I agree. It could have been anybody who did that. I don't really think you needed Christopher Walken. But like you compare it to like Emperor Palpatine. I gotta stop referencing Star Wars. I promise. I'm gonna stop. But any other
I
emperor,
think you've said Star Wars more than you've said Dune.
oh God.
Just
But
say Dune 10 times in a row to even it out.
Dune, Dune, my Dune, Dune, Dune,
Dune.
Dune. Even compared to Baron Harkonnen, who's like over the top evil, right? It's
Hmm.
like it felt like this portrayal was very nuanced,
Yeah.
because it shows that like I could see this happening to Paul. The
Yeah.
position itself takes its toll on you because of all of these things that come with it, all of
Hmm.
this power and all of this cowardice and paranoia of losing that power, to where that power is controlling you and you're just left as this empty shell of a man.
Hmm.
And it also kind of helps us. And so, like, I think that was a nice juxtaposition too, because again, most of the time when we get villains, they're like overly evil, overly um over the top of like anger and stuff. Like, the way Baron Harkonnen just kind of like killed that guy just because in the first Doom, when he just killed him, the doctor, because he was like, oh yeah, you can join her in
You.
death, basically.
Hmm.
Uh and that's who Baron Harkonnen is. And that's kind of, I don't think having two of those would have worked really well. I think having the over the top evil guy be Baron Harkonnen, and having this dreary, weary guy who needs to retire. Like that's what I
Hmm.
got the entire, like, you need to retire, sir. Set up a plan
Yes.
and go off, pass it down. But he's unwilling to, because the power is on his head and it screws him up so much that he'll kill this person that has done nothing to him. So I think I liked all of that. I can't necessarily say now if like that's what Christopher Walken saw with the character and he decided to play it that way, then I'd say I like what Christopher Walken did. But if that's how Denis Villeneuve wrote the character, then because like there's some things in the movie that you feel like, okay, this actor is doing it, and I feel like almost only them could do it. Like I didn't know
Hmm.
Austin Butler could do this, but I feel like there was no better casting after I watched him do it. I don't know anyone else that could have done what he did. Same thing with
Right.
Timothée Chalamet. Same thing with Zendaya, because of the right
Hmm.
amount of youthful. Because that role took a lot of youthful energy as well to be able to
Hmm.
question all that, like all of that. All those actors were
Yes.
perfectly cast. I don't think he was
Yes.
perfectly cast, but I think he did. I think what he did worked.
Yeah. I would say to challenge that because I do agree with that feeling of I think it's important for that character to feel worn out like
Mhm.
that. But to me, it doesn't read as worn out, but was also once incredibly ruthless, ruthless enough to plot a secret plot that could destroy you with another great house member to kill your cousin. And I'm so tired. I'm so worn out from all of this. To me, it just reads like I don't make any decisions for myself.
Yeah.
And the way he took it, it doesn't feel like exhaustion from once being ruthless. And I think that's what I just don't get from Christopher Walken, that I think a Patrick Stewart could have felt more like, I could see you as somebody who at one point was very terrifying, but not as much anymore.
So is that closer to the book's portrayal? Like one person who is worn out now, but at one time was like a ruthless dictator? Or is he more just like kind of a puppet that's pulled along by different things?
I mean, he is. You don't get a whole lot of the Emperor from the books, and
Okay.
what scenes you do have were just different scenes
Hmm.
than what we got from the movie. So it you can't really. I don't think it's tough to really compare them necessarily one to one. Um, but I definitely got a sense more from the book that he was, just from his actions,
Yeah.
from somebody who would plot against his cousin like that and feel remorse over it.
So was Duke Atreides, was he the cousin of the Emperor?
Yes.
Okay. I don't, did they go into that in the movie or was that a book thing? I can't
And
remember.
I'm trying to I'm not
I'm
sure.
like, how we,
See, this is another one of those give us an extra hour
yeah,
and
we
flesh
could
all
talk
those
about it.
things,
Yeah.
out. Like explain how like spice smuggling works,
Yeah.
explain how the Spacing Guild works, explain why spice is so important to the universe. The characters were spot on and perfect, but if anything could use an extended edition to help flesh that
Oh,
out,
yeah.
it would be Dune.
I mean, it would make money, so Warner Bros. Should just hop on it. And I think, like, when I think about the plot, like, if I think about how did the plot to kill Leo Atreides even start, like, I think to me, because they know the Harkonnens and the Atreides have been fighting for centuries, and like Baron Harkonnen decided like he wanted to be the one to wipe them out. Like to me, it makes sense that like all those whispers of like, oh, Leto could ascend to the Emperor. I feel like the Harkonnens started that and that way it would maybe convince the emperor to let them use their starter car so that way they could completely go in and wipe them out. So, and again, to me, that all just goes with the emperor is an easily manipulated being.
Hmm. Interesting take.
Yeah.
See,
So,
this is what I love about, like talking to people who do not like reference the book, because I get to hear so many different
perspectives on
perspectives
it.
that
Yeah.
I would never think of myself.
The thing is, like, good movies will make you talk about this and look at it, even in things that you don't necessarily agree on or like see. I can't even say like agree on, but like see eye to eye. There's just
Hmm.
so many layers to unpack, and it's like we could keep going for another 3 hours on
Hmm.
this. And I
Yeah.
think that's the sign. That's the sign of a truly great film. So I guess in a little bit of time that we have left, quickly, is there anything that you want to see in Dune Messiah?
I want Denis to just keep doing what he's doing. Oh, no, I take it back. Get a little weirder,
Get a
because
little weirder.
there's there's weird he cut a lot of weirdness out.
Yeah.
I understand, but I think we can take it.
I think
As
the
a
world,
collectively, we can
yeah,
take it.
the world and the character he's got us invested in the characters. He's built the
Yes.
world up enough to where the weirdness won't turn us away. I think
Yes.
you're spot on about that.
Introduce, because it's already weird.
Yeah.
Introduce a little bit more. Give us the fish monster. Give us clones. Give us all of that.
And I know Denis is probably not one, he's never going to sacrifice story for action. And I feel
Hmm.
like he's one of those directors that like not like shies away from action, but he's like, I don't really tell my movies through action. It's just kind of like a cherry on top, as you can tell, like
Hmm.
in the first two Dune movies. I know that I want to see the Holy War because I know, again, from Dune to Dune Messiah, we don't really see it. It just kind of happens. We're 12 years later. I know
Hmm.
we're probably not going to based upon his style of storytelling because he's probably going to be
Hmm.
more interested in telling the story itself. But, whether it's in glimpses or whether we go right into it, I just want, because I feel like if we see it, it will help us establish Paul needs to be taken down. like he's not a good ruler, seeing the
Hmm.
bloody genocide. Because like we saw glimpses of it and we see it in a vision, but we don't really see it happening. And I feel like that will go a long way in helping Denis. And it could even be done as like a montage, but I think it'll help going a long way because you don't want someone, my brother once told me like one of the best things that you do as a director is to show, don't tell. So my
Hmm.
point would be, don't tell us that he's Attila the Hun. Don't tell us that he's Genghis Khan. Don't tell us that he's Hitler. Show us.
Show us that he's
Show
Attila the Hun.
us exactly. Show us that this is what Paul is now. And you can do that without the Holy War, but I think the Holy War is a great way to do that and give the action itch that a lot of sci-fi fans have.
Maybe your wish will come true.
I guess we'll have to wait to find out. Well, thank you
Hmm.
for joining us on the Blurred Wire. Leave your comments and thoughts about Dune Part 2 down below. And until next time.
Until next time.